Okay, hello everybody and welcome to this webinar on philosophy in the classroom. So this webinar is part of the British Philosophy Fortnight, which is a campaign ongoing at the moment. We're just past halfway through it. It's organised by the BPA, the British Philosophical Association, and we're raising awareness of what philosophy is and that philosophy matters and that it engages with real, everyday, contemporary issues. So if you want to see many of the other events going on as part of the fortnight, have a look on social media with the hashtags Philosophy Matters and Philo Fortnight 2025. So we're also grateful for the Royal Institute of Philosophy for sponsoring this event as well. So my name's Kathleen Murphy-Hollies. I'm a research fellow at the University of Birmingham, and I'm here just chairing this webinar on philosophy in the classroom. We'll hear from each of our three speakers, and then we'll have a Q&A after all of the three speakers have gone. Feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box whenever, but we'll come to them at the end. The event is also being recorded, just so that people are aware. So we're going to start off now with our first speaker, who is Dr. Laura D'Olimpio. She's an Associate Professor of the Philosophy of Education at the University of Birmingham. She's going to talk about philosophy for children, the community of inquiry and flourishing in education. So Laura, go ahead when you're ready.
Great, thank you so much. I'll just make sure that everyone can see my screen. That's visible?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. So welcome everyone to this webinar, and I'm very excited to be talking to you about why philosophy should be taught in the schools, on the curriculum, wherever we can sneak it in. I think it's absolutely vital. And I'll tell you a little bit about the Philosophy for Children community of practitioners and researchers who advocate for teaching philosophy in schools and beyond schools using the community of inquiry pedagogy. Now, they defend this approach as teaching critical, creative, caring, and collaborative thinking skills, the 4 Cs. They want to show you how it can make the learning of children and young people inclusive. It is child-centered. It's focused on participants' own questions, listening to those voices which aren't often heard, and it does aim to develop the whole child, so it's holistic in this sense. Now, I claim that all children would benefit from learning philosophy and practicing ethical decision-making within the safe, protected space of the classroom, facilitated by expert practitioners. If the aim of education is flourishing, then we must include philosophy on the curriculum. And hopefully in my talk today, I'll be able to convince you of that. So the starting point is obviously, why should we teach philosophy in schools? And I'm sure you can immediately think of some objections. It's too hard. What if people aren't interested in it? Well, I want to just take us back to what is the aim of education? We grab children, we pop them in schools, in classrooms for many, many hours of their young lives. We must have a really good reason for doing this. Now, education aims at a number of desirable ends. We want children to be reasonable. We want them to be democratic and law-abiding citizens. We want them to be well prepared to join the workforce. We want them to develop their skills and talents and work out what those things are. We want them to establish good friendships and learn how to relate to one another. Ultimately, I think we want them to flourish and to lead meaningful lives. So what does education do to achieve these goals? Well, in order to be reasonable, we teach them critical thinking skills, and that might be across different subject areas. If we want them to be democratic and law-abiding citizens, we're teaching them other virtues and habits of behaviour and values that include things like tolerance and respect. If we want them to be well prepared to join the workforce, we probably have to teach some transferable and or vocational skills. But we also want them to develop their skills and talents and work out what they like, what they're good at. So we have to teach academic subjects alongside the arts and physical education. But most importantly, if we really do want them to go on to lead good lives, to flourish, to have meaning in their lives, I think we need to teach philosophy and ethics. Now, what is flourishing? Very brief potted definition here. To flourish is to lead a happy and fulfilled life that is personally meaningful, where one is using their own skills and talents. This kind of definition is drawing on the theory of Aristotle and virtue ethics, and it suggests that in order to live well, you need to develop certain kinds of virtues. You have to have the right kind of character because we are social creatures. We live amongst others. So the idea of social, political, and ethical agreement and working out decisions is a key part of that. And so the virtue ethicist thinks that developing these kinds of virtues enables learning how to do the right thing in the right way at the right time for the right reasons. But that you need to learn by doing it, you need to practice it. And this good life will have something that you're doing that's meaningful, as well as these friendships and relationships that are working in a constructive way. Now, that's obviously a huge remit, but schools have an integral part to play in helping children to go on to be adults that flourish. It's not just enough that schools teach children about rules that they should follow. They need a chance to learn how to develop skills, dispositions, and habits that are associated with being respectful and tolerant, autonomous decision makers who are reasonable and democratic, that they can listen to multiple points of view and decide what is reasonable, that they have good reasons for doing this, and that it's going to be for the good of not just themselves, but the community of which they're a part. So, given that, children need the opportunity to be able to engage both critically and compassionately with these kinds of concepts. They need to have the chance to put into practice and learn what it means to have the kinds of conversations and the behaviours that follow that show that these values really will help them to go on to lead their good and meaningful life. So when we think about cultivating children's characters in this way, well, the time that they spend in schools interacting with others as well as the subject matter that they're dealing with, I think really is key to building that starting point, which hopefully, is their flourishing lives. So first up, critical thinking. I think that, we hear very often that we want our students to go on to be critical thinkers. And those skills are certainly developed in all academic subjects. It's not just the domain of philosophy. However, having said that, the discipline of philosophy has a really wonderful historical toolbox of useful skills and techniques that are specifically dedicated to enhancing critical thinking skills. Philosophy has been in the business of critical thinking since it was, created back in ancient Greece in the Western tradition and further afield beyond that. What we see is that the reasonable person is going to align their belief with the evidence, and they're going to subject that evidence to scrutiny. They're going to really check whether they've got, assumptions or premises that they haven't, given due account to, that the evidence that they've gathered points in the direction of the conclusion that they are then holding as a belief. And philosophy as a subject explicitly teaches the moves involved in considering whether our evidence is pointing to this or that conclusion. It teaches the argumentative moves involved in making a sound, valid argument, how to test inferences, to check for assumptions, and also how to spot what we call informal and formal fallacies. So you've probably heard of the fallacies before, but particularly if we think about the informal fallacies for one moment, these are when reasoning goes wrong or flawed logical errors, really. And people do them all the time. And so, there's lots of really great activities in the classroom that I won't have time to talk about here now, but you can play all kinds of games with spotting informal fallacies in arguments, in things that people say. And a really useful source for checking these is in politicians' speeches or in people's comments that they make on social media. So straight away you can see things like, an ad hominem, which is an attack of the man, attack the person, where someone might be trying to have an argument and they attack their person that they're disagreeing with rather than the argument itself. And that's actually a flaw in the logical argument. So critical thinking is really important, and philosophy has lots of great tools to help people become better thinkers. But I also want to say that we need to also have the virtues such as compassion. We need to have the compassion alongside the critical thinking, because if children are to be good democratic citizens, if they're going to be virtuous, they need to be ethical as well as reasonable. And for me, that means that caring is an important part of what it means to be part of a community. So, particularly with increasing levels of anxiety and depression, I think it's important that our children, our students, grow up and they learn to be compassionate, both face to face as well as online. And one example of how philosophy with children or in schools, in classrooms, does this is by using narratives, by using narrative artworks. And again, going back to our virtue ethics tradition, this is based on this idea that humans are storytelling animals. We learn from the stories of diverse others. So we're drawing on people like Alistair MacIntyre and Martha Nussbaum to argue that we can see bodies of literature that can develop our imaginative and sympathetic engagement with others by allowing us to practice that with characters and fictional scenarios. So especially for children and young people, instead of asking them to suddenly be compassionate to a sort of hard-hitting news story, we can start with a narrative, a story that's fictional, that allows them to imaginatively engage with ideas and characters that are different to themselves and play with those concepts. And they can start to engage imaginatively, sympathetically, compassionately, and then learn to apply that beyond the fictional world to others that they are encountering in real life. And we've seen this. We've seen this in places where we've taught philosophy in the classroom using P4C methods. We then see them go out into the playground and they're better at sharing. They're better at having a disagreement that doesn't end in a fight. So given the prominence of stories in educational spaces, particularly with very young children and in the early years, using them then in this philosophical way makes good sense. So I think that our moral attention definitely needs this notion of compassion, and we need to put that hand in hand with our critical thinking skills. It has to be both critical and compassionate. So what is one way that children can actually practice this in the classroom? Well, using those narrative artworks as an example, as a starting point for philosophy for children, philosophy is actually a practice, it's an activity, it's a pedagogy, and it's done in the classroom using the community of inquiry. So the story is the initial interesting, get the imagination going, stimulus material, and then the students come up with their own questions that become the basis for a discussion. They get to practice respectful listening, their critical dialogue, as well as their caring responses to each other. Now, I'm already starting to answer the how we should teach philosophy in schools. I've said why we should teach it. I think it helps students to go on to lead flourishing, good, meaningful lives. But how should we do it? Again, the history of philosophy goes back all the way in the Western tradition to ancient Greece, and the Socratic method is a classical way that this can be done. And philosophy for children, this is the starting point of a dialogue. So the Socratic method, named after Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, who would wander the streets of Athens and have conversations with whoever he met along the way, encourages a conversation where there's questions and answers and a dialogue. There's at least two points of view, and there's an encouragement that you put forward an idea, there's a counter argument, which is responded to. So there's this dialectical method. Now, philosophy for children started in the 1970s in America, and it started with using that idea of the Socratic method and adjusting it for younger participants. So Matthew Lipman and Anne Margaret Sharp, drawing upon the pragmatism of John Dewey and the psychology of Vygotsky, decided that they wanted to bring this critical, creative and caring thinking to education. It was really the idea that the students' own questions would be at the heart of the dialogue. It's democratic because every voice is equal. We want to listen to all of those different voices and listen to one another. And it encourages critical thinking, which Lippmann defined as thinking that facilitates judgment because it relies on criteria, is self-correcting, and is sensitive to context. Now, again, answering the how we're teaching philosophy in the classroom, and especially with younger participants, the community of philosophical inquiry is the pedagogy advocated for by advocates of philosophy for children. It sees the participants all seated in an inward-facing circle. Now, the facilitator of the discussion, the teacher, is one of those participants in the circle. So they're not standing at the front of the classroom with all of the answers to the questions that they are asking the students. They are a member of a community of inquiry that are having a really interesting conversation that is following the inquiry where it leads. It starts with the students' own questions, and they listen to each other, they respond to one another. And the idea is that it moves closer to truth and wisdom as it goes along. The idea of, again, self-correction coming in is that members of this community are going to offer counter arguments, or they're going to disagree. It's unlikely that they'll all absolutely agree. And so in this way, the worst answers are left behind and you move closer towards better answers. So the community of inquiry is helping to cultivate critical thinking. And again, we've got a great definition here by Harvey Siegel, who says a critical thinker then is one who is appropriately moved by reasons. She has the propensity or disposition to believe and act in accordance with reasons, and she has the ability to properly assess the force of reasons in the many contexts in which reasons play a role. Philosophy, argue Michael Hand and Carrie Winstanley, is the best possible subject for helping children to become effective critical thinkers. It is the subject that can teach them better than any other how to assess reasons, defend positions, define terms, evaluate sources of information, and judge the value of arguments and evidence. And I think that even though we've been speaking about how this is such an kind of classical and old approach, it's an old subject area, it is so relevant to contemporary times. Students must be agents of text rather than victims of text, whether that text is printed and found in the school or visually digitized and found in the street. With these days, we've got so much information and images coming at us, with a click of a button online. And we want people to pause and think critically about what they're seeing, what it means, what's appropriate, and whether they agree or not with it. So by teaching philosophy and ethics in schools, we're practicing a philosophical dialogue that is critical, creative, caring, and collaborative. It's the actually doing of it that helps children to understand and think about and question the rules and values they ought to uphold, while also engaging with the ideas and one another critically and compassionately. So by using this philosophy in schools pedagogy of the community of inquiry in particular, I see students as practicing the skills and developing habits of respectful, tolerant, autonomous decision makers who are reasonable and democratic. By being part of this community of learners, students are discovering for themselves how such values contribute to the good and meaningful life, to their good and meaningful lives. The narratives, I think, are very, very useful. I think they're a really wonderful way into exploring especially difficult or controversial issues that I think need a place to be discussed. That there's not a place on the curriculum to discuss some issues around, especially ethics. And by using narratives, you've got this wonderfully protected, safe place in the classroom where the dialogue is facilitated by a trained expert. That's important as well. And it helps students to reflect on issues that are actually relevant to their lives, even at a young age, but particularly when they grow up. They can reflect on moral character, friendship, role models, those key elements in a flourishing life. And for all of these reasons that I've given you, I see the community of inquiry as a radical pedagogy. And I think this is a good thing. So the community of inquiry, favoured by practitioners of philosophy for children, prioritises the centrality of children's voices, hearing their own questions and letting them guide that discussion. It's dialogical, there's a conversation going. The teacher becomes a facilitator of that dialogue. There's not just a right answer that the teacher's waiting for the student to tell them so they can tick it off. They're genuinely following this conversation as it unfolds for its own sake. It's not aimed at winning an argument. It's a collective endeavour to aim at truth and wisdom. And as an example of that, students are allowed to and encouraged to change their mind, to offer counter arguments to their own positions, to explore these ideas. And because of that, there's a space for moral education, which includes cultivating the intellectual and moral virtues. And as far as I can see, that is exactly what we need. If education is going to aim at preparing students to lead these flourishing, meaningful lives, then these are the kinds of skills that they need. And philosophy, particularly philosophy done in this dialogical way, is absolutely vital. It's very well suited to teaching students how to live well. Thank you very much.
Amazing, great. That's really interesting. Thank you very much, Laura. So now we're going to move on to Lisa Bortolotti. So Lisa's a professor of philosophy at the University of Birmingham and at the University of Ferrara. She's spearheading the Philosophy Garden project, which she's going to talk a little bit about now, and also about using games to teach philosophy. And just a reminder to go ahead and put your questions in the Q&A if you want, and then we'll get to them afterwards. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you very much, Kathleen, for the introduction, and it's wonderful to be here in such good company to talk to you about the Philosophy Garden, which is what has mostly occupied me in the last couple of years. So what is the Philosophy Garden? The kind of less interesting answer is that it is a website. It's a website that collects resources that can be used to engage people who are not specialists in philosophy with philosophical reflection and philosophical discussion. And by people, I mean young children in primary school, I mean adolescents, but also the general public. I think the most interesting answer to the question what the Philosophy Garden is that it is a virtual philosophy museum. And the reason why I'm saying this is that I've taken inspiration for this project from Anna Ichino's project of the Philosophy Museum in Milan, which is the very first philosophy museum in the world. And their work was aimed at creating very engaging resources, mostly videos and games, that anybody could use to think about interesting problems that affect all of us. And I think the Philosophy Garden has very similar aims as the Philosophy Museum. And it's mostly virtual because the resources are online and people can try them out individually or in groups, or a facilitator can bring them into a classroom or any kind of venue where people meet and talk to each other. But occasionally the Philosophy Garden also happens in real life. And so we have got initiatives with some cultural venues, for instance, the Winterbourne House and Garden, where we have lunchtime philosophy workshops, and we use the Philosophy Garden's resources there. So what is the idea? We gather resources. The resources that we design ourselves are aimed at helping us understand important issues in our lives. For instance, how we explain significant events that happen to us, or for instance, what is art, or how we should deal with each other or talk to each other when we don't share the same beliefs and the same values. Everything in the Philosophy Garden is suitable for children and young people. but will be of great interest to anybody really, any age. The kind of resources are in a way layered so that you can get a certain understanding of the resource if you are a very young person, and you can get a further understanding of it if you already have some background knowledge or experience in your life. What I think makes the resources special is that there is no middleman. So these resources are designed by experts. And what I mean by experts is that the people who write the scripts for the videos or the people who work on the games are actually the same people who publish books and articles in peer-reviewed journals and are recognized as leaders in their field. So there is that kind of passion that is transmitted about something that they are working on, something that matters to them. And I think that's really important and special about the Philosophy Garden. So I'm going to briefly describe both videos and games by giving you an example of each. I think videos are, I guess, what we can offer mostly to teachers and educators. We have 11 original videos, and our videos are what is sometimes called explainer videos. Now, usually explainer videos have two possible functions. Either they explain a concept. So you might remember, for instance, during the pandemic, there was a very short video suitable for young children explaining what the virus was and why we had to follow certain precautions, wash our hands, and so on. So that was an example of an explainer video of public utility. Other explainer videos are much more focused on a specific product or service. So the idea is that they tell us how to use this product or why this service is important. So they are a form of promotion. But in this case, explainer videos are a modern version, a contemporary version of Aesop fables. So they're very short animated videos from 90 seconds to 2 minutes that tell us a story where the characters are animal characters, but just like in the Aesop fable, they behave a bit like humans. So they talk to each other, they disagree on something, they work together to achieve a certain end. And towards the end, there is a message that is there not just to be taken dogmatically, but to be explored and challenged. So you might wonder, how can I possibly do philosophy with something that lasts 90 seconds? And that would be a very good question. So my view is that the video is just a prompt. The video is not doing the philosophy. People do the philosophy after they watch the video. So the video stimulates a personal reflection if it's just one person watching, or a group discussion if it is watched, for instance, by a group of young people in a classroom. And that kind of discussion and that kind of challenging the ideas that are presented in the videos is where the philosophy is done. And of course, the video is not by itself a resource, but it is accompanied by a lot of additional resources that help facilitators and educators to kind of get the conversation going. So there are quizzes and worksheets and other resources, for instance, additional readings that people can do or additional videos to watch. Now, although the video is the same for every age group, the resources that go with the video to facilitate the discussion and the reflection are aimed at specific groups of children. So for instance, for our videos, we've got some worksheets that are aimed at primary school children and some worksheets that are aimed at secondary school students. So why do I like the idea of doing philosophy through fables? Of course, this is not a new idea. Philosophy has been done through fables for centuries. And the fable is often considered an argument that proceeds by analogy. So you see a fictional story, you think about what happens in the story, and that helps you understand something that happens in real life. So what I like about it is that because there is a very limited plot and there is no time for character development, remember 90 seconds, the key problem really stands out. There is no distraction, right? You're not like blown away by a beautiful description of a landscape, right? You're just focusing on the interaction between the characters. And the other thing that I think makes them really special is that they can be used with very young children who have limited attention span, who, for instance, cannot read very confidently. So it's in a video, it's not in a book. And so they can just absorb the information and think about the information without having to access something that is written down and they may not be able to deal with independently. Now, in all of our stories, or at least most of our stories in the videos, what we find is the idea that there are different perspectives on a problem. So there is a tension, a conflict between the characters. And what is important is to kind of realize that for each problem that we have, there may be different ways of thinking about it. And some of the ways that are not our ways can still be seen as valuable. And it is valuable to try and get out of our head and into someone else's head to look at things from their point of view. And as I was saying earlier, there is always some kind of connection between the conflict in the story and real life issues, which is very often in our videos made explicit towards the end. So I want to give you a demonstration of one of our videos. This is a video that is not taken or inspired very literally from an Aesop fable, although there is an Aesop fable where there is kind of a clash between different members of a deer group, a deer herd. But in this video, we wanted to talk about something quite complicated, actually. It's a notion that goes across epistemology and ethics in philosophy, the notion of epistemic injustice, which sounds like a mouthful, but this is the idea that sometimes we don't listen to people or we don't take them seriously, not because they are unreliable, but because we have a prejudice against them, because we associate them with a negative stereotype that prevent us from giving them due consideration. So you may think this is very complicated, and actually, you know, it is in philosophy. But I've shown this video, for instance, to primary school children in a very deprived school in Birmingham, and they got a lot out of it. So I'm just going to show you the video first, and then give you some ideas about what can be done with the video.
The fawn and the mountain lion. When is dismissing another's report an act of injustice?
It's late. Let's go to the lake to get some water before it gets dark.
Wow, I would love to gobble that up. Oh no, never mind the acorn.
Mummy, Daddy, I just saw a huge mountain lion behind the bushes. We have to go. It is not safe here. If there was a mountain lion behind the bushes, I would have heard the steps. You must have imagined it.
I am not sure we should stay. Shouldn't we listen to Little Fawn and get back to the herd? He has never lied to us before.
Calm down. Young ones don't distinguish reality from imagination, and they always try to draw attention to themselves. Why don't you get some water, Little Fawn? You will be thirsty otherwise. This water is delicious, so fresh.
Are you okay? We sometimes dismiss a report when we don't trust the speaker due to some negative stereotype. But in dismissing what the speaker has to say, we pay a high price. We reject information that can be valuable to us. You are right, Wise Owl. In our herd, females and fawns are never listened to, but Little Fawn recognizes a mountain lion when he sees one. To dismiss him is not just risky, it is an injustice. He should not be silenced when he has something to say.
So I'm hoping you could see in the video that there is a very simple storyline But there are lots of interesting issues coming up. One issue is that when we dismiss someone's report, when we don't believe what someone is saying, just because we have a prejudice against them, we are at risk of not being able to access information that is useful to us. So in the case of the stag, is putting himself and his family at risk from the attack of the mountain lion by not listening to what the phone is saying. And it's interesting that when the stag explains why he's not listening to this warning from the phone, he uses some of those stereotypes that are often associated with young people in a disparaging way. They are attention seeking. They can't distinguish a reality from imagination. And these are actually the kind of stereotypes that we see even in young people who, for instance, struggle with their mental health. Very often they're seen as, drama queens or people who can't really cope with stress or don't have the maturity to react to life adversity in an appropriate way. We can also see some interesting issues about the fact that the epistemic injustice and not listening to someone is also something that harms that someone, because the person who is not listened to is then excluded from decision making. So the phone would like the family to go back to the herd, but that kind of proposal is not even considered, right, as a legitimate proposal. Not just rejected, but just not considered as something that could be interesting or useful or important for the family to do. And finally, you can see the social aspects that surround epistemic injustice. And for instance, in our society, we know that some people are more likely to have their reports and testimonies dismissed than other people. And that's why the doe, when she talks to the owl, talks about, herd society, like deer society is a very hierarchical society where fawns and females are not very important. And it is the alpha male who is really leading the group. And so you see that there is this idea that it's not just, the single stag's fault for behaving in a certain way. It's not just his responsibility. It's not just a bossy father or an uncaring husband. He is actually someone who is embedded in a society that allows certain behaviors to happen, doesn't challenge those behaviors when they happen. So as you can see, there are a number of interesting issues that can be brought out and discussed with different groups at different times. And on the philosophy garden, you'll have lesson plans with ideas about objectives and activities that can be done with children in the classroom. There are also quizzes, comprehension questions, but also prompts for reflection. So for instance, the word stereotype appears in the video. When I presented this video to children in a primary school, I was curious to know whether they realized what stereotype meant. And I was lucky because, a girl just told me a perfect, absolutely perfect definition of stereotype when I asked. But those kind of notions can be further discussed. Examples can be asked from the young people to see whether they actually understand these concepts, whether they can apply them to new situations. One thing I asked people in primary school after showing this video is whether they've noticed this kind of thing in their own life or in movies or books that they were familiar with. And one of the students told me, oh, this is exactly what happens to Lucy in Narnia. Now, Lucy is the little girl, and her brother and her sister don't believe her when she says that she has accessed, this new world through the wardrobe, even though Lucy had never lied to them before. She has never given them reason to believe that she was unreliable. So the fact that, the student came up with this absolutely perfect example from their own experience of books of epistemic injustice really shows that the material can work even with young audiences. Of course, there can also be some interesting nature facts in the philosophy garden. For instance, it may be fun to know that indeed mountain lions attack deer and feed on deers, and as you can see in the picture, so you can also learn something about nature and animal life. We also got worksheets. That's for maybe a kind of older audience. When you get secondary school students, that you can divide them into groups and give them these worksheets to guide their discussion in the groups. And what is interesting about what we do at the Philosophy Garden, I think, is that we always tend to promote creativity. So we want the young people to come up with ideas for themselves. So in this task, I'm asking, what are Stag's reasons for dismissing phone's warning? Are they good reasons? But the follow-up question is about what kind of story will make it the case that Stag is right in dismissing phone's warning. So can you think of a different version of the story where Stag would be justified in ignoring phone's warning? How would that have to differ from the story in the video? And young people are really good with these kind of questions. And for instance, I suggested the crying wolf story is an example where maybe we are justified in stop and don't pay attention to warnings. Very quickly illustrating an example of games. For us, games are an engaging way to learn some theory, analyze problems, find creative solutions as individuals or a group. And at the moment, we only have 2 games in the Philosophy Garden, one on personal identity and one on conspiracy theories. So there could be a way of introducing a new topic. So you make people play the game, and then, that's an introduction to maybe some piece of theory or some new issue that you want to discuss. Or you can use the game as a way to test their existing knowledge of something that you've talked about before. There are 2 aspects of the games that I think are important. One is that there is a competitive element in it. So people are motivated to engage with the tasks. There is an objective. And the other one is the perspectival element. Again, people are asked to think about things from a different perspective, from their own perspective. So the personal identity game, sorry, I went too fast, is a game where we ask people to imagine 3 main theories of personal identity. You are your body, you are your brain, you are your mind. And then to go through a list of thought experiments that philosophers still debate about, and answer the question whether you'd survive in that situation. What you can do when you introduce the topic is make reference to popular culture. For instance, primary school students often read Dogman comics, and there has been the movie out recently, so they will know the story of the police officer and his dog went through an explosion, and the head of the dog stood on the body of the police officer. And then you've got the question, okay, who is Dogman? Is it the police officer or is it the dog? Another thing that you can do in these cases is link to scientific discoveries or real life issues. For instance, we do know that scientists have attempted head transplants in dogs. So this idea, is not really sci-fi, that we can have in the future maybe head transplants for humans. What would that mean for personal identity? If you put the head of a person on the body of someone else, who is surviving and who is not making it? So just as an illustration, in the game, you've got these different thought experiments that are all very fun and very kind of engagingly described with humor. For instance, teleportation is a classic one. And then you ask the question, after teleportation, would you survive or not? Would you be the same person as before? And you ask them to answer the question from the point of view of one of the 3 theories. The brain theory, the body theory, or the mind theory, and then you give them, what we think is the solution, but you explain to them, of course, that philosophers disagree among themselves about the solution. So the most important thing is not the answer. The most important thing is the reason for their answer. Another example of a scenario is the transformation taken from Kafka's Metamorphosis. Again, if you become a cockroach, are you still yourself or not? Similar idea, people have to answer from the point of view of the theory and give a reason. And what I like about this is that, again, there is a creativity element. At the end of the game, you can ask them, okay, which theory makes the most sense to you? Which theory answered best to the questions that you have been asked? But also, could you make your own personal identity theory? Is there a theory that is even better than the 3 theories that we have shown you and see what people come up with. And I can tell you, again, I tried this several times with students of all different ages. They come up with really interesting ideas. Okay, so just to conclude, this is a gallery of pictures of people. You can see Laura and Kathleen there presenting material from the philosophy garden in a variety of contexts, from master classes to workshops in cultural venues, to school visits, and in the philosophy museum. And I just want to give Kathleen the opportunity for a minute or two to describe her own experience of using the videos.
Yeah, so I have a bit of experience. I've taught on masterclasses and for some outreach summer school schemes using the videos and specifically about conspiracy theories and teaching about some of the latest papers and thoughts in philosophy about conspiracy theories and why people might believe them. And I found it really enjoyable. And what I really enjoy about teaching maybe conspiracy theories in particular is that I find that students are so excited to be able to talk about stuff that they've seen on TikTok. And usually they're not allowed to do that kind of thing. And when I say, no, I want you to tell me the weird stuff you've seen on TikTok, and I want you to tell me about your friends and family members who might believe things that are totally different to what you believe. And I think sometimes they're surprised that it's totally what they're meant to be doing there in the classroom or in that session. And so I enjoy that. And I find that the videos are quite, it's easy to kind of adapt them for whatever kind of age and ability you have in front of you. So, if they're younger, you can just keep to the basics, and they are obviously kind of like cartoons with, like, as Lisa said, limited kind of character and plot and so on. But at the same time, there's input into the script, which is based on, proper published academic work. And so you can kind of tease that out, and you can kind of make that clearer to the students and ask them more kind of like probing questions about why the characters do what they do if they're older and they're a bit more have more ability. And so I find them really kind of like adaptable in that way. So I've just enjoyed it, and I find the videos adaptable.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. And just to conclude, I hope you enjoyed this very, very brief incursion in the philosophy garden, and you will find our resources useful in the future. We have to thank all of our sponsors, of course, that have enabled us to, produce the resources, but also bring them to young people and to the public in general. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Lisa. Okay, we'll move on swiftly to Henry. Henry's an associate professor in philosophy at the University of Birmingham, and he's going to talk about his project Philosophy Smash with Henry, where he interviews philosophers about contemporary topics to use in the classroom. Go ahead, Henry.
Sorry, everyone. I started sharing my screen and then I realized that that would not let me unmute myself for some reason. There we go. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. So I want to talk about this new project that I have, which is called Philosophy Smash with Henry. Unlike the Philosophy Garden, it's much more recent. So it was only launched, I think, less than a month ago now. But what it is as Kathleen said, it's a series of interviews with philosophers that are designed for use in the classroom. So I'm an associate professor in philosophy here at Birmingham, and I'm the person who makes the kind of the interviews. So the project is called Philosophy Smash with Henry, and it's a series of videos. The first sort of season, if you like, of the series will have a minimum of 12 interviews in it. It might have one or two more, but 12 is what we're aiming for. They're short. Each one of them is only 5 or 10 minutes long. And what it is, it's a kind of fun, quirky interview between me and an expert in a particular philosophical topic. And we chat about that topic for a bit and intersperse it with classroom activities, basically. They're designed for classrooms. They're designed for classrooms. So each video comes with a lesson plan. So you can simply take the lesson plan and use it along with the video and apply it oven ready in a classroom if you like, or you can chop it up, change it, and use it in different ways as you see fit. Often, a lot of the videos have one game associated with them, or two, or maybe three different activities. So teachers can basically, they're quite modular. Teachers can use whichever activities they want to use. They might not use others, or they might break it up into two lessons as they see fit. They're quite flexible like that. The age group that they're primarily aimed at is Key Stage 2 to 3, so roughly 9 to 13-year-olds. But the activities and the lesson plans have been designed to kind of scale upwards. Similarly to what Lisa was talking about with the philosophy garden, the activities that we use are meant to be accessible to kids, but a lot of them are designed so that they would work just as well with an older age group. So, for example, one of the activities that we have is a debate about whether eating meat is okay. That's very much something that a Key Stage 2 child could engage in quite happily, but it's also something which, you know, an older age group could do, and indeed it's something that professional philosophers do all the time. So, what counts as an expert? So what the interviews are, primarily, they are interviews with professional philosophers based in UK universities. The topic of the interview will always be something that the philosopher is an expert on. So again, much like the philosophy garden, the content of the video stems very directly from published books and journal articles that are written by experts. Occasionally, there will be a very philosophical issue, which I think we really want to discuss, but one where it's not the case that there's necessarily a UK philosopher that we can get who's an expert. So in that case, we do have one video with a computer scientist and another video with a journalist who works on these kinds of issues. But broadly speaking, they are the experts are British philosophers who are experts in the topic of the interview. The interviewees are chosen first and foremost for their expertise, but we also aim to adequately represent women, non-white folks, marginalised communities, and people from the north of England as well, which is where I'm from. So that was important to me. Okay, so what topics have we covered so far? At the moment, we only have 4 videos up, but there's going to be a few going live just in a couple of days, actually, a few more. At the moment, we have one on how we should treat animals. So that talks about whether eating meat is okay and whether we should cage animals in zoos. Our interviewee for that is a philosopher and also used to be a zookeeper, which is pretty fun. So we chat about that, and we have all sorts of activities for the kids to do based around the ethics of non-human animals and how we should interact with animals. We have one on whether today's science will always be true. So, you know, the puzzle here is something that a young child can quite easily understand, which is that we feel like we should trust science, and in a way we definitely should trust science, but lots of the theories that scientists have proposed in the past have turned out to be wrong. So what do we do about that? You know, we used to think the sun goes around the earth, but we now know that's wrong. So why should we trust scientists these days? We've done a particularly fun one on how we know what animals are thinking. So this is something I think that can really engage a younger audience, because a lot of people have pets, and as humans, we naturally attribute mental states to pets all the time. We think, oh, she's hungry, she's scared, you know, she wants feeding, she doesn't like this other animal, things like that. But actually, when you think about it, it's really unclear how we actually do that. It's, you know, if an animal is so different from us, how could we ever confidently know what an animal's thinking? So we talk about that from the point of view of how a philosopher would try and work that out. And we also had one with Kathleen on the nature of conspiracy theories and why people think the world is flat. So again, something that any young person can easily understand. These are some of the topics we have later. We talk about panpsychism. which is the view that pretty much everything in the world, maybe even the universe itself, is conscious. So that one is, could a rock be conscious? We talk about how we understand each other's actions, how we can predict what other people are going to do. How do I know what you're doing? Then we talk about some quite social ethicsy issues. So this is one of my favorites. Should robots look after the elderly? A lot of people are designing robots these days with the idea of care work in mind. And a lot of people are worried about that because, you know, does it mean that that elderly people are going to stop having human contact? Do I have a right to the internet? Should the internet be seen as a human right in the same way that we see peace or water as a human right? Is it okay to have someone else's baby? This is to do with family ethics and the ethics around surrogacy. And that kind of deals with some quite heavy topics about what a family looks like these days and how different family units can be formed. And we have a super fun one on whether prayer is useful. So this is a really fun little puzzle that I particularly like. If God doesn't exist, then there's no point praying because you're not praying to anyone. If God does exist, he already knows what he's going to do, or she. You're not going to change their mind by praying, so why bother praying? So whether God exists or not, there's no point praying. That's the puzzle, and lots of philosophers of religion have tried to resolve it. And then, because it's me, we have another one on robots as well at the end. Okay, so the apologies for the slightly dull-looking diagram. The videos have been designed so that they target parts of the curriculum. So on the left, you can see a list of various topics that we cover, and then in the middle, we've got the subjects that they're meant to be relevant for, and then on the right, we have specific bits of the curriculum that are specifically meant to be useful. So I won't go through all of these, but the idea is actually quite simple. The idea is it's difficult to find more space on the curriculum to insert philosophy into. I think philosophy should be taught as it's a topic in and of itself on the curriculum. But even if you don't have time to add anything to the curriculum, these videos will still be really useful as well. That's the idea, is that stuff that already needs to be taught, these videos are directly relevant to. And as you can see, there's parts of the science curriculum and parts of the religious education curriculum that these videos are directly relevant for. So these are topics that are on the curriculum anyway, or they're relevant topics that are on the curriculum, so they can slot in quite naturally into the teaching as it goes. So because of you might be a bit concerned about the idea of just like a video interview. You know, is that going to maintain a child's attention span for 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, or 10 minutes? That seems like quite a long time for a child to just watch an interview. So in order to deal with that, what we've done is we've broken up each video into chunks. So the child typically, it would be relatively unusual for the entire class to watch the whole video in one go and then do an activity. Rather, what happens is I tend to give a little introduction just to get kids thinking about the basic topics. Then we have a pause where there's either a classroom discussion or there's an opportunity for a debate, or there'll be an activity written into the lesson plan for the kids to do there. The idea there is you get a sense of what kids' opinions are before they hear from the expert, so you get their creative juices flowing a bit. Then we have a really fun segment where the expert gets 45 seconds to summarize their views. So it's sharp and small and short and punchy, and students can remember it and can take things away. Then there's a little back and forth, a Q&A between me and the expert, and then we finish on a final thought from the expert as well. So every lesson plan for this project is different. There are different ways that each episode is broken up and different places in the lesson plan where the activities are slotted in. You'll see a couple of examples of the activities later in this presentation. But basically, that's the structure every episode has. And at certain key points, the idea is that you can stop the video and do an activity, then resume the video, and so on. Okay, so I thought you might want to see it. So what I've done is hastily put together a greatest hits of all of the first 4 episodes. So all this is 4 experts giving a 45 summary of the topic of the video. So please excuse the slightly dodgy editing because this was just cobbled together by me yesterday.
All right, so I think when we're thinking about animals, what's important to keep in mind is that they're creatures like us. They're not objects like tables or chairs, but they're subjects who have minds of their own and they can feel things like pleasures and pains. And so for that reason, we need to consider their interests and think about what's good or bad for them, just like we do for other humans. Now, this doesn't mean that animals have the same interests as humans do. They don't want to go to school or vote in elections. But we need to learn about what these animals are like so we can make sure that we do what is good for them from their own point of view. And this involves things like making sure we're not hurting them and that we give them the things that they want, like good quality food or fun and interesting activities for them to do.
Okay, so there are some things about individuals that might mean that they're more likely to believe strange things like the earth is flat. For a start, like, some people might just have what we sometimes call a conspiracist mindset, where they are maybe particularly suspicious and they were particularly paranoid. They don't think that there are coincidences in the world and that things just happen that way sometimes, but rather there's always a pattern and there's always somebody behind it and there's always a plot going on. They might be a member of a group in society who are oppressed, and society doesn't seem to care about them so much. And when they feel powerless, they're more likely to believe conspiracy theories. It might be that they just trust very different people to us. All of us have to trust people when it comes to finding out about the world. They trust different people to who we trust. We trust scientists, but maybe they have other sources that they trust more. And also, it's not just things like photos of the Earth looking round and the other things that we find out with our senses. Sometimes we also believe things on the basis of just what all of the people around us believe and what the people that we admire and we love believe.
And that is 1 minute. Sorry to cut you off, but that was a minute.
So I think that lots of today's science will always be true. And that's because scientists have worked really, really hard to make sure that some of their claims are true. Other claims they're still not so sure about, but many things they used to think were true, but then gradually all scientists, or nearly all scientists, agreed that these things just must be true. So just to give an example, one thing they discovered was that our liver cleans the blood. At first, that was just a theory. Then they got loads of evidence together. And then finally, everybody agreed it had to be true. And now we call it a scientific fact.
Okay, that's 48 seconds. So that's not bad. Our record so far is 42.
I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head already. I think the best way to know what an animal is thinking is the same way that we know what anyone is thinking. We look at how they're behaving. So like if I wanted to know if you were enjoying this conversation or not, I'd look at whether you were smiling and nodding or if you were falling asleep in your chair. And it's the same with animals. We just look at what they're doing. The thing that makes it tricky is that they don't always behave in the same ways that we do. So their behavior means different things. Like if we smile, we're happy, but if a chimpanzee smiles, it means that it's scared. So we have to kind of learn really carefully how animals' behavior corresponds to how they're feeling in different situations and use that to kind of crack the code of what their behavior means.
Okay, cool. So sorry, it started again. So that is that's the vibe that the interviews go for. Those are the small sections at the start where people summarize their ideas. I think the best way of getting a sense of what the project's all about is to just go to the website and have a look at some of the resources that are already there. So I'll just rattle through a few of those before the end of the presentation. When you visit the website, you'll see each episode has its own little blurb, and then all the resources are just listed underneath that. Basically, the lesson plan is just designed to explain how you use all of them. And the activities that come along with the lesson plan have been, for each one, they've been kind of designed to maximize creativity and also to maximize, I tried to make each activity very unique to the topic of each video. So for example, when we talk about how do we know whether what an animal is thinking, we talk a lot about this problem that an animal's behavior might just not mean the same thing as a human's behavior. So when a human smiles, they're happy, but if a chimp smiles, that means they're scared. So we ask the children to design their own experiment to test what an animal is thinking. We have a game that's based on the conspiracy theory game that Lisa was talking about in the philosophy garden, where children are asked to design their own conspiracy theory, and then we kind of test it based around whether it hits the kind of the criteria for a conspiracy theory that Kathleen was talking about in the video. When it comes to talking about whether today's science will always be true, we have a game where we ask students to rank real, genuine scientific claims that have been made by scientists based on how much they believe them and how much they think they're likely to be overhauled in the future. And then there are certain topics, especially in ethics, which just lend themselves really, really well to a classroom debate. So for the is it okay to eat meat topic, the how should we treat animals one, we just have a straight out debate about whether eating meat is okay. So each of the things comes with its own lesson plan, as I've said, and they also come with activity sheets. So the idea is that the video is just one component in kind of a pack of resources, basically. So a lot of students work better if they have something written down or if they have a mixture of video and written material. So in order to make sure that students remember the important things, we have activity sheets with very specific instructions. Here, this is the one for how to design your own experiment. And they tend to have quite a step-by-step structure, especially the ones that are aimed at the lower age group. So if you're asking, like, how should you design an experiment to find out what an animal is thinking, it can be quite easy to feel a bit intimidated by that. Like, how do you even go about designing an experiment? Isn't that the kind of thing scientists do rather than philosophers? But when you have the activity sheet, the idea is it just gives you step-by-step structure and it makes those things much easier. Here on the right, you can see the activity sheet for fake plots, which is where students are asked to design their own conspiracy theory. They're given certain features of a conspiracy theory, which have been brought up in the interview that we did with Kathleen, and their job is to kind of design their own conspiracy theory that fits with these things. Quite a lot of students are, again, like I say, they would rather have something written down which summarizes the video, maybe to read before the video or to read alongside it. And that's why each video comes with handouts that summarize the main ideas that are expressed within the video. So these are basically there to remind students who might have forgotten core ideas from the video, or if they just prefer to have the written information along with the video as well. So here you can see, this is one for whether zoos are okay. You can see what we go for is very much big, punchy ideas that can easily be understood and easily digested. This one is designed for a debate in the class, so we've put contrasting opinions and then some kind of thought there. But they're very easy to digest, but they're based on what the experts have said in the video. So even though they're very punchy and quick to understand and to get your head around, the content comes directly from primary research done by the expert. And here's another one for whether it's okay to eat meat. Again, same idea. We've got opinion 1, it's wrong to eat animals. Opinion 2, eating meat is okay. Opinion 3, it depends on the animal's welfare. And so you've got 3 contrasting opinions. It gives children something to really grab onto when they start engaging in a classroom debate. So that's it. That's what it is. I hope you all enjoy looking at it. And if you have any feedback or anything, feel free to email the Philosophy Smash Gmail account. So thanks to all the people who are our partners and who've sponsored us, and also this particular image of me with my hair and my brain, that was done by Jen Elliott. So very much thanks to her.
Great, thank you very much, Henry. So we've got some questions coming in, but I think I might kick off and give people some time to just gather their thoughts and enter any questions that they might have as well by asking the panel in general, what have you found to be the biggest challenge in getting your respective kind of teaching projects off the ground? Maybe you didn't see that this particular aspect of it was going to be difficult and you were surprised by something, or maybe not. So does anyone want to go first on what's been challenging with their teaching project? Lisa?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's not a very original thought, but it's just literally getting started. So getting people to know about what we are doing. So that was a challenge. For us, it has been a question of offering to go into classrooms and demonstrate the material and give taster lectures at the university, or kind of using social media to share the material. And it has worked, like more and more teachers know about the resources and use them themselves and give us feedback, but it's been kind of, you know, very, very slow and gradual. So it has been an interesting experience, kind of creating connections with teachers and educators and creating trust between us. And it has also been the most rewarding part of the project, because, you know, you feel you're part of a kind of common effort as well. And the other thing is that our videos are animated, and we are not animators, we're philosophers. So we need constantly to raise funding to get, you know, the creatives to provide these beautiful animations, which I think are part of the success of the Philosophy Garden. And so that is also, you know, something that keeps us occupied.
For me, I would say very all the things that Lisa said as well, but also it is very challenging. It can be very challenging to take a philosopher's and career's worth of research and boil it down to just one question. So I think one of the things that makes philosophy look a bit more intimidating than it really should do is that a lot of philosophers quite like jargon and terminology. So boiling that whole area down to a question like, could a rock be conscious? Or how do I know what you're doing? How do I know what an animal is thinking? And presenting that in a really punchy way it can be a real challenge, and it's very much something you've got to work with the philosopher for to work out how best to do that. Because I think for the vast majority of them, they've never tried anything at this age group before. It's quite young, but that's all part of why we do it.
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Kathleen. I think taking the big picture, my aim has been to try and get philosophy onto the curriculum, where in many countries it's not necessarily on the curriculum as a standalone distinct subject. That varies country by country. So in some places, in Europe, it's taught as sort of a history of ideas or thinkers, or it might be on like the International Baccalaureate. Whereas in UK, it's often taught as part of RE, religious education, and then it's squeezed into that. And so one of the biggest challenges, I think, is saying why philosophy is important, why people should teach it, and why it is appropriate to be taught at different ages in pre-college level schooling spaces. And so I think that requires a political moment where you can advocate for it. So usually it might be that the curriculum is being revised or reconsidered and you've got a chance to argue for it. It requires critical mass where philosophers, like we're doing as part of Philosophy Matters Fortnight, we get together and we all make the case. And as Henry just said, where we learn how to speak in an ordinary language rather than using the jargon that's just for our discipline to explain why the skills that philosophers bring to educational spaces are useful and beneficial to everyone, and that they don't have to be esoteric and locked away in ivory towers. And I think philosophers are getting so much better at that, but it's still the case that in most places we don't have it as a standalone subject on the curriculum. And then we start making these other moves, which again we've seen in the resources shared today from Lisa and Henry, where we offer ways that it can be taught within the existing curriculum or in multiple different subjects, which it can be done that way as well. So we sort of have to do this is our ideal, and then, but we'll throw everything at you and see whatever you want to use and show that philosophy is great and helpful.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to read out a few questions now. So I'm just going to read out a question here from Ivan Bok. So they say, hi, thanks for the interesting presentation. I'm from South Africa and we recently created a philosophy club, currently only at one school, but we want it to grow. Here is my question. What is the best way to encourage parents to allow the discussion of controversial topics and issues, given the hesitancy of parents to trust others with the ethical education of their children? Will there always be a selection effect where the students most likely to join the club or lesson are already those coming from more open-minded families? Is it better to stay away from those sorts of topics when working with kids? I'm thinking about topics like abortion, religion, affirmative action, and so on.
Should I answer this one?
Go ahead, Laura.
So I think this is such an important question, and it's such a great question. And the first thing to say is, of course, pay attention to the context that you're working in. You need to be mindful of the age group, the country, the legality, what's going on in the political space that you're working in there and then. So I think that that has to be said. We can't just assume that it is safe to have controversial conversations in every single context. Having said that, philosophy done in a dialogical way, I think, is the place where you can have those difficult conversations that there is not that space to have otherwise. And the idea that the skills of dialogical philosophy is to explore different points of view, to be respectful and considerate of those points of view, that you don't have to agree with everyone. Those are the skills I think that are so needed today, where, you know, we see so often the polarization where people think, I have to hate you because you have a different view to me, or I can't talk to you because you have a different view to me. And that is really worrying me. And the skills of philosophy bring together, you know, an interesting conversation where people disagree. And even that, you know, you might actually all agree, but you want to bring forward different points of view so that you can respond to them to get that interesting conversation and the argumentative, but in a, you know, charitable sense, spirit happening. So I think that you want to start with learning the skills of the dialogue before going to the most fiery, heated conversations. And I think that setting ground rules is really important. So if you have a facilitator of the discussion, I think it's important that they are properly trained. I really do. I think that it's not just easy to facilitate this kind of conversation, and starting with rules like address the topic, not the person, you know, take turns, listen to people, interpret their point of view as charitably as you can. Those are really vital. And the other thing is that the group needs to develop that trust so that it is the case that they can have a conversation and that unfolds, rather than, you know, that there might be someone in that group that, you know, you don't want them being bullied for their point of view. So there are a few things to consider, but once those are in place, it's a great space to be able to have conversations that matter in the real world that aren't addressed elsewhere on the curriculum.
Thank you, Laura. Anyone else on the panel want to contribute to this? All good. In that case, thanks, Laura. I'll move on to another question now. Jep Killian Rank Cornham says, hey, thanks for a good webinar. If the goal is, among other things, to cultivate virtues in children, should we then distinguish between virtues in children and adults? And if so, what is the difference between virtues in adults and children?
Maybe I can just say something, and then the other panelists can also help me out here. But I'm thinking that in particular, when we're designing, like when I'm designing resources, I'm looking for this capacity to take another person's perspective on the problem, and considering other people's contribution with respect and an open mind, basically. So if we're thinking in terms of virtues, that can be kind of summarized with open-mindedness, intellectual humility, so not thinking straight away that you've got all the answers, all the expertise, that your view is superior to other people, And curiosity. I think curiosity is a very, very key virtue, right? Because what you need to do is to be genuinely interested in what other people have to say. If you think that you're right, and nobody can kind of make you think any differently from how you're already thinking, you're not going to listen attentively and with an eye to try and understand another person's perspective. And in my view, these are equally important for children and adults. And you can always learn to practice these virtues better at any age. But I think it is essential to start as young as we can, because it becomes more and more difficult when we're older to practice this humility that we were talking about and this curiosity, because very often we're very conservative about our views. We find it very painful psychologically to change our minds. So adopting this frame of mind, this kind of community of inquiry ethos that Laura was talking about as early as possible, knowing the skills that are needed to do that is very important.
Yeah, I would add to that. I think that in addition to all of the things that Lisa said, I think that one of the best virtues that philosophy teaches is a balance between open-mindedness and seeing other people's perspective with sort of critical thinking. So I think, you know, you just don't just want to learn what other people's views are, but you also have to respectfully and critically engage with them. And you should always be critically assessing your own views with just as much strength, because some of them are probably wrong in the grand scheme of things. And that's very much a virtue, I think, that should be shared with adults as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think that these are virtues that we want to see in everybody. So I don't think that they're age specific. There are some virtues that young people have that you see in philosophy for children, that like the curiosity, the asking the why questions. We very much associate that with children and young people. And we want them to keep that. So part of the idea, I think, of the pedagogy is actually that you encourage people to continue that curious questioning, and that it's okay to ask those questions and check the evidence. We don't want people to lose that as they get older. And so I think, you know, we want to see that more. And the other one that, you know, we see more with young people is humor, playfulness. You can actually have a lot of fun with these quite difficult and heavy topics and conversations. And again, you know, we don't want to lose that when we're older. We want to keep playing with ideas in this imaginative way. So, you know, yes, it's serious, but that doesn't mean that we can't have fun along the way.
Excellent points, thank you. Okay, so another question, this might be directed at you, Laura. Samuel Jonathan says, this might be a broad question, but what is the current state of philosophy for children in the UK? I'm curious about how much research is being done in this field and how it is perceived within academic philosophy. From this seminar, it's clear that P4C, philosophy for children, is taken seriously, even by university professors, which is great news. But how well established is it as a field of study at PhD level? Are there dedicated research programmes, funding opportunities, and specific academic institutions leading the way in advancing philosophy for children?
Oh, that's a great question. It's growing and it is being taken more seriously. There are more people contributing to the research, but looking at both theoretical and empirical research on this. And there are a couple of not-for-profit charity organisations that, you know, they dedicate themselves to this research that also includes training up practitioners, and not just doing it in the classrooms, but we're seeing community of philosophical inquiry happening in the community, in prisons. There are other spaces where we see this happening. But of course, I think, like a lot of philosophy in general, it's still having to fight for its place. It's having to fight for funding and to say that it's relevant. And, you know, you've got a crowded curriculum that they're trying to find spaces to do this in. So there is spaces to go and to look at. I think in one of the other questions that I answered, I put a whole bunch of links in there. Those are some of the places to look for some of those sorts of things. In terms of something like a funded PhD studentship and these kinds of research opportunities, I think they are more, you know, interspersed. They're sort of one-off here and there. You have to have your eyes peeled, or be signed up to some of these email lists and to know where to look. It's not as regular as I would like to see, but I think have a look at those links and things like that. And then if you have a sort of more specific question, you are welcome to email me, and if that's going to be of use to you.
Yeah, I would just to add to things Laura said, there's been quite a bit of empirical research, as Laura mentioned, on the impact of things like P4C and Sapere. If you go on P4C's website, they list some of that quite helpfully. So if you want to see what the sort of wider impact of these kinds of philosophical resources is, they've got quite a good website that collates that data.
Okay, great, thank you. Another question I think for Laura here. This is from an anonymous attendee. For continuing philosophy as a specific subject from Key Stage 2 and below, do you think that philosophy could act as an alternative to history or geography as a core humanities subject, or for the EBAC?
This is a tricky one. One of the things that I find in the UK, which isn't the same in other countries, is that there's such a narrowing down of the curriculum. So as soon as students hit a certain age, like when they do picking subjects for GCSEs and then their A-levels and things like this, they suddenly are studying fewer subjects. And my background is from Australia, where that doesn't happen in that way. And so, I hate to have to put philosophy against other subjects and say, oh yeah, we'll get rid of history, but we should advocate for philosophy instead. I wish it could be a case of the more the merrier. And honestly, I understand that, again, talking about time constraints and the crowded curriculum, that's not always possible. But in England, I think it is a shame that we have to narrow down those choices so much that then you are going to be saying, oh yeah, we should do philosophy instead of RE or instead of history or instead of these other subjects. So I think I'm sort of sidestepping answering your question directly. I really want to see philosophy be an option, and it is in some schools. They have philosophy as an A-level option that they can choose, and it is there. If you do the International Baccalaureate, you can choose to do extra philosophy and not just the theory of knowledge. That's one of their core modules. But yeah, I would like it to be available more widely than that, for sure.
Right. If either of our other panelists want to add anything. In that case, I think we'll wrap up now. Thank you so much to all of the panelists for joining us and for talking, and thank you for everyone else who joined us for this webinar as part of the Philosophy Fortnight. Have a look, check out some of our other webinars that are coming up as well. But otherwise, thank you all, and goodbye for now.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Kathleen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.